Hi there, I'm Marjorie. Have you ever walked into a room thinking you belonged, only to realize they had already erased you from the story? At my mom's will reading, they laughed at me like I was nothing, but my daughter had something they weren't ready for. Why would a family work so hard to cut someone out of their own life? Before we dive in, tell me, have you ever felt like the outsider in your own family? Let me know in the comments. Chapter title: The Price of Freedom. Opening scene: after the firestorm setting, small secondhand apartment. Boxes stacked around, evening sun slipping through dusty blinds. Context: Marjorie and Lila have moved out after selling everything to reclaim control over their lives. Tone: quiet, a strange peace after the storm. Conflict momentum, CM. Low emotional impact, EM. Melancholy, relief, subdued hope 2. Reflection on the aftermath. Action: Marjorie mentally revisits the choices that led her here. The betrayal, the defiance, the losses. No calls from her mother, no apologies from her sister, no acknowledgement from anyone. Subtext: she realizes that freedom often comes wrapped in loneliness. Tone: introspective, heavy, but clear-eyed. CM. Settling EM. Resignation, quiet strength. Characters C1, Marjorie, C2, Lila, 3. Hints of unresolved tension. Action: a letter arrives from the credit card company, reminding Marjorie that some debts take time to erase. Lila asks carefully, "Will we ever go back?" Subtext: some ties, though severed, leave splinters. Tone: bittersweet. Healing isn't instant. CM. Low, EM. Tenderness, lingering sadness. 4. Emotional depth. Internal monologue. Marjorie reflects, maybe closure isn't a door slamming shut. Maybe it's learning how to walk away even when it creaks behind you. Physical detail. Lila tacks up a hand-drawn sign above their new front door. Home is where we begin again. V. Ending on a quiet note with a hint of future possibilities scene. Marjorie and Lila sit on the floor, eating dinner off mismatched plates, surrounded by hope more than furniture. A text pings on Marjorie's old phone. An unknown number asking, "Are you ready to talk yet?" Subtext: some doors will knock again, but she holds the choice now. Tone: open-ended, thoughtful. Conflict momentum, CM. Settled completely, emotional impact, EM. Gentle hope, unfinished healing. Chapter details. Characters focused. Marjorie, C1, Lila, C2. Implied presence of C3, sister, and C5, mother. Through silence. Setting details: mid-sized town, United States. In a humble but safe new apartment. Early winter outside, soft lamps inside. Conflict momentum, CM. For chapter, low. Settled emotional impact, EM. For chapter, resignation. Quiet hope. Empowerment. Estimated characters. Length: approximately 3,800-4,000 characters, linked to next chapter. She stared at the blinking text, realizing that not every knock deserved an answer. Continuing the content of the previous chapter, she set the phone down on the windowsill, choosing instead to lean into the silence. End of Danny Chapter 9. Da Huan Than De Du. Ket Thuk Mo Ani Dep. Dung Yu Kao CY 2.1. Delai Duvicho Ngoy Dok Tungam. Goy Momot Han Trin Chualan Dai Fia Truok. Noi Ban Zak Nan Ok. Toi San Sang Nan Len Debat Dao Viet Noi Dung Ku The Tung Chapter. Cho Len Tu Ban. The house smelled like old lavender, faint and dusty, as if even the memories here were too tired to linger. I stepped into the living room, the air heavier than it had been outside, and froze without realizing it. On the wall where our family gallery used to hang, pictures of birthdays, Thanksgivings, Christmas mornings, there was something new. A fresh arrangement of frames, polished and neat. Every smiling face was there. Mom, Sherry, even distant cousins I hadn't thought about in years. Every face except mine. My stomach dropped. My hand reached up instinctively, stopping just short of the frame's edge. No trace left. No accident. No oversight. Erased. Behind me, Lila shifted her weight, her sneakers squeaking softly against the wooden floor. She said nothing, but I felt her small eyes scanning the wall with me, searching for something that wasn't there. It shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. The finality of it, the ease. I stood there longer than I should have, feeling the cold seep into my bones, a slow realization crawling up my spine. They hadn't just removed me today. They had been preparing for this for a long, long time. A memory surfaced, uninvited. I was 8 years old again, sitting alone on the edge of a school auditorium while every other parent clapped and cheered for their child's recital. Mom hadn't shown up. She said she had an appointment, but Sherry's science fair? She took the day off, bought cupcakes for the whole class. Another flash. My 16th birthday. A forgotten cake, a missed call. But Sherry's engagement party was an event fit for royalty, catered and glittering under rented chandeliers. It wasn't new. It was just finally visible. I pulled my hand back from the frame as if it burned. Maybe it did. Lila stayed silent, bless her heart. She understood more than most adults I knew. I caught her reflection in the glass of one of the photos, her brow furrowed, her small fists clenched. She saw it too. She saw me vanish right in front of her. I stepped back, wrapping my arms around myself. The armchair in the corner still sat where it always had, the one where Mom used to knit on Sunday evenings. I moved toward it out of habit, but even here, something was missing. No hint of her perfume, no warm throw folded over the back. Just a chair now. Just wood and fabric and absence. Maybe that was all we were to them now. Absence. I turned to leave the room, feeling smaller than when I had entered. As I moved, Lila reached out and tugged gently on my sleeve. I looked down at her, at those fierce brown eyes that saw too much and said too little. "They can't erase you, Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling but sure. "Not from me." My throat tightened. I wanted to tell her I knew that. I wanted to tell her it was enough, but I couldn't get the words out, not yet. Instead, I squeezed her hand and led us away from the wall where my ghost still lingered, unseen but not forgotten. The dining room smelled of reheated casseroles and old, stubborn furniture polish, the kind that clung to the air no matter how many windows you cracked open. The chandelier overhead buzzed faintly, a dying bulb flickering just enough to make the shadows in the corners twitch. I shouldn't have come. The invitation hadn't been an invitation at all, more of a command delivered with a smile. "It would mean a lot if you joined us," Sherry had said, voice so sweet it stung. But there was no seat set for me at the head of the table, no warm greeting, no whispered welcome. Just an open chair near the end, half in the shadow, next to the rickety sideboard with the cracked gravy boat. Polite conversation floated like a film over the table, heavy and sticky. Lila sat beside me, shoulders drawn in, eyes darting between faces she barely knew. I could feel the thrum of tension in the way she picked at her napkin. The clink of silverware against china marked the start of the real festivities. Sherry raised her glass, a smile too wide stretching her face. "Here's to those of us," she said, voice dripping, "who didn't run away when things got hard." The words sliced through the air cleaner than any knife on that table. Laughter rippled around the room, small and sharp. I forced a smile, my throat dry. I didn't need to look up to know every pair of eyes was flicking toward me, waiting to see if I'd crack. Vernon leaned back in his chair, the old wood groaning under his weight. He cut a piece of steak, the blade of his knife scraping a little too hard against the plate. "Some people just can't hold it together, huh?" he said, chuckling as he lifted the bloody slice to his mouth. The sting rushed to my cheeks before I could stop it. I kept my gaze fixed on the pale mashed potatoes on my plate, my fork suspended midair. No one defended me. Of course they didn't. I swallowed past the lump in my throat and set my fork down with a clatter that drew a few quick, guilty glances. But no apologies. Not here. Somewhere across the table, Lila's hand found mine under the tablecloth, her fingers tiny but steady. It was enough to keep me from standing and walking straight out the door. I sat through the rest of the meal without tasting a thing. I listened to them discuss renovations to Mom's house, vacation plans, the weather, every safe, shallow topic that kept the knives buried just under the surface. As dessert was served, a pie sagging sadly at the center, Sherry leaned closer to me, her breath warm and heavy with wine. "You'll see tomorrow," she said, her voice syrupy, condescending. "You always were the outsider, Marjorie." This time I looked up. I met her gaze head-on, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't look away. The conference room smelled like old leather and fading perfume, a scent that clung too tightly to the heavy velvet curtains, and the mahogany table stretching across the space like a barrier. I paused at the doorway, feeling the air thicken as conversations hushed, replaced by a silence so complete it almost rang in my ears. I scanned the room, my steps cautious. There was an empty chair near the center, just to the right of the lawyer's podium. It wasn't the head seat, but it was close enough to matter. I moved toward it, head high, refusing to look at the faces that turned just enough to watch me without offering a word. Then Vernon stood, the heavy scrape of his chair cutting through the hush like a blade. He got there first, slapping a hand on the back of the chair, a smirk curling his mouth. "You understand, don't you?" he said, voice oily and sweet. "This is family business." The words hit harder than if he had shoved me physically. I froze, my hand hovering just above the chair's polished surface, before I let it fall back to my side. My smile didn't reach my eyes, but it was enough to keep my pride intact as I nodded and backed away. I found another chair, one tucked in the far corner, half shadowed by the velvet curtains, barely touching the edge of the table. I sat down slowly, feeling every pair of eyes return to their own scripts. Now that the scene was over, the message delivered. I didn't belong. They wanted me to know it before a single word of the will was read. The walls of the room seemed closer now, as if they too were conspiring to shut me out. I excused myself under the guise of needing the restroom, slipping out into the long hallway lined with memories. Framed certificates, old photographs, mostly of Sherry. And when I reached what used to be Mom's small office, the door was cracked open. Curiosity pulled me forward, though my gut warned otherwise. The room was almost empty. The familiar shelves where Mom kept old scrapbooks were bare. The desk, once cluttered with letters and knitting patterns, was scrubbed clean. Even the worn armchair where she used to sit, reading the same mystery novels over and over, was gone. I moved inside on autopilot, my fingers brushing against the walls where nails still stuck out, small ghosts of pictures once hung. No evidence left that I had ever existed here. It wasn't a recent decision. It wasn't even a hasty one. This was planned, meticulously, purposefully. Erasing me hadn't been an act of grief. It had been an act of will. Home wasn't furniture or walls or photographs. Home was belonging, and I had been evicted long before my mother's heart had ever stopped beating. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the hollow emptiness, feeling it fill the spaces inside me that I used to fight so hard to protect. There was no scent of her perfume, no laughter, no memory warm enough to fight back the cold. Finally, I stepped back into the hall, the door creaking as it swung wider behind me, exposing all the nothingness it had been guarding. When I returned to the conference room, Lila was sitting stiffly in her seat, both hands clutching her jacket tight against her chest. And tucked within those small fingers, almost hidden, I caught a glimpse of the envelope. She wasn't trembling. She was holding her ground. Something was coming. And this time, it wouldn't be me standing alone. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, casting long, cold shadows that stretched across the cracked tile floor. The air in the room was thick, almost metallic, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Mr. Langford cleared his throat, a small, deliberate sound that sent a ripple of tension through the assembled crowd. The will reading had officially begun. Sherry lounged back in her chair, her posture dripping with a smugness she didn't bother to hide anymore. Vernon sat rigidly beside her, his fingers tapping out a slow, steady rhythm on the armrest, a drumbeat of barely concealed satisfaction. I sat at the far end of the table, feeling the weight of invisible knives aimed at my back. Mr. Langford's voice was smooth, practiced, almost detached as he began listing the estate's divisions. It was happening exactly the way Sherry had planned, and from the way her eyes gleamed, she thought the victory was already hers. And then, quietly, without hesitation, Lila stood up. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the soft rustle of her jacket. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, neatly folded envelope, worn at the edges but unyielding in her tiny hand. Without looking at anyone, she walked the length of the table and set it gently in front of Mr. Langford. "There's one more thing Mom wanted heard," she said, her voice steady, cutting through the room sharper than any gavel. You could hear a pin drop. Sherry's smile faltered. Vernon stopped tapping. Even Mr. Langford, seasoned as he was, hesitated for a beat longer than necessary before reaching for the envelope. I watched, heart hammering so loud I was sure Lila could hear it. She returned to her seat beside me, chin high, her small hand trembling only slightly as she laced her fingers through mine. Across the table, Sherry bolted upright, her chair screeching against the floor. "This is a private matter," she snapped, voice rising higher with every word. "Not some courtroom drama. Sit down, Lila." Her words echoed off the walls, brittle and desperate. Mr. Langford didn't look at her. His attention stayed fixed on the envelope, his thumb sliding carefully beneath the seal. He spoke in the same even tone he had used all morning, but there was a new weight behind his words. "I am legally obligated to review any undisclosed amendments," he said. The color drained from Sherry's face so fast, it was like watching a painting being wiped clean. Vernon leaned forward, whispering furiously in her ear, but Sherry was too stunned to respond. I squeezed Lila's hand, feeling a surge of something fierce and wild rise up inside me. Pride, awe, a bone-deep gratitude for the girl beside me, who had carried the truth all the way to this room full of wolves and laid it bare without flinching. For a heartbeat, it didn't matter what the letter said. The simple act of standing up, of refusing to be erased, had already changed everything. Mr. Langford unfolded the letter with a kind of reverence, the crinkle of paper louder than any voice had been so far. The air in the room stretched thinner with every second, pressing down on us, a silent reminder that some moments change everything, and that this might be one of them. I barely breathed. Lila sat stiff beside me, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes pinned on the letter like it was a lifeline. Across the table, Sherry's smile had frozen in place, a crack running through her careful facade. Mr. Langford cleared his throat once and began reading. The words weren't complex. They didn't need to be. "To my daughter Marjorie, who never gave up on love, I leave the house on Willow Lane, all personal savings, and my heartfelt hope that she will always know her worth." Gasps echoed in the room. Small, sharp intakes of breath quickly stifled. Sherry's knuckles whitened where they gripped the arms of her chair. Vernon sat frozen, his jaw clenching so tight I thought I heard the grind of his teeth. A part of me wanted to crumble right then, to dissolve into tears and let the years of being second best wash away. But another part, a stronger, fiercer part, rooted me to that chair, kept my spine straight, my chin lifted. The weight they had forced me to carry all these years shifted, just slightly. Enough for me to draw a breath without it hurting so much. Mr. Langford placed the letter down with a slow finality. He didn't look at Sherry. He didn't have to. Before anyone could speak, Lila stood again. She fished into her small backpack and pulled out something else, a photograph, yellowed at the edges, but intact. She crossed the room without fear, setting the photo gently beside the letter. It was me. Me at maybe 6 or 7, perched on Mom's lap, her arms wrapped around me, both of us laughing at something outside the frame. No posing, no stiff smiles. Just joy. Just proof. The room shifted in the way that only truth can shift it, quietly and then all at once. I stared at the photo, something old and broken inside me mending a little at the seams, not because they finally acknowledged me, but because I remembered who I was before they convinced me otherwise. I wasn't the forgotten one. I was the one who survived. Vernon muttered something low and angry under his breath, just enough for the nearby family members to stiffen. "This isn't over yet," he hissed. I lifted my head fully for the first time that day, my gaze steady and clear. For the first time, it didn't matter what they said next, because I was finally ready to stop listening. The room had changed. It wasn't just the buzzing fluorescent lights or the way the blinds rattled against the windows with every cold gust outside. It was something heavier, something that made the space feel smaller, the air sharper, like breathing inside a collapsing balloon. Mr. Langford held the amendment aloft, the weight of it settling across the table, across all of us. Sherry shifted in her seat, the false polish of her posture cracking at the edges. Vernon leaned forward, an edge to his voice sharper than the creak of the old wood under his elbows. "We were protecting the family," Vernon snapped, spitting the words as if they tasted foul. "You were the one who left." The silence that followed wasn't the stunned kind anymore. It was the kind that comes when a crowd starts realizing the person holding the microphone has just confessed to the very crime they tried to bury. I didn't move. Neither did Lila. We sat there, steady, letting the web untangle itself strand by rotten strand. Vernon tried again, fumbling, his hands gesturing wildly. It was complicated. Mom wasn't thinking clearly. We wanted to preserve her dignity. Preserve her dignity by erasing her final wishes, by stealing her voice. My stomach twisted, but my face stayed calm. Because now, finally, the lies weighed more than the truth. A chair scraped the floor. It was a young woman, one of the office assistants who had sat silently against the wall all morning. Her hands shook, but she stepped forward, clutching a thin manila folder against her chest like armor. "I couldn't be part of this anymore," she said, her voice barely louder than a whisper. All eyes swung toward her. She didn't flinch. She crossed the room and handed Mr. Langford the folder. Inside, tucked neatly between witness affidavits and time-stamped copies, was a backup copy of Mom's true final amendment, untouched, unedited, and damning. The crack wasn't just in Sherry's composure now. It was in the entire room. Chairs shifted, eyes darted. The sturdy walls of denial and manipulation that had seemed so invincible only hours ago buckled like cheap drywall under a sudden, violent storm. Mr. Langford didn't say much. He didn't need to. "This changes everything," he announced, holding up the backup document like a gavel coming down. And just like that, the empire of polite cruelty they had built crumbled. Not in screams or shouts, but in the hollow shuffling of feet, in the way no one could quite meet each other's eyes anymore. The room was coming apart at the seams. Papers littered the polished floor, chairs sat skewed from hastily abandoned conversations, and the air itself crackled with what was left unsaid. No one looked at each other anymore. No one looked at me. One by one they rose. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in a decade gathered her coat without a glance in my direction. An old neighbor who had once braided my hair at family picnics kept his eyes low as he shuffled past. Even Vernon, who had barked so loudly minutes before, left without another word, his back rigid with silent retreat. Each chair scraped the hardwood like a punctuation mark, sharp, grating, final. The sounds stacked on top of each other until they filled the room more completely than any shouted accusations ever could have. Lila slipped her hand into mine under the table. It was not a grand moment. There were no triumphs here, no confetti celebrations for a truth finally dragged into the light. Just this, an exodus of guilt, cloaked in a silence too cowardly to bear the weight of what they had done. And then there was Sherry. She made it all the way to the door before she stopped. I didn't move. Neither did Lila. Sherry turned, her hand still on the knob, her expression carved from the bitterness that had built her. "You'll always be the outsider," she hissed, her voice soft but deadly, aimed straight at my chest like a dagger. "You never belonged." The words hung in the room, heavier than any accusation, sharper than any slap. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because for the first time I felt the truth of it. And it didn't hurt the way she wanted it to. It didn't cut me down. It carved me free. I watched her leave, the door swinging closed behind her with a click so soft it was almost merciful. Lila's hand tightened around mine, grounding me to the floor that no longer felt like it belonged to them. Her tiny fingers said everything words couldn't. "You are enough." Without a word, we rose from the table and made our way toward the heavy oak doors. I paused only once, glancing back over my shoulder, not out of regret, but to witness it fully. The empire they built on silence and shame had fallen, not with a bang, but with a whisper. Outside, the cold hit us immediately, sharp and invigorating. The wind tugged at my coat, threading its fingers through my hair, urging me forward. I didn't look back again. The morning light spilled into the kitchen like a soft apology, brushing over the clutter of half-unpacked boxes and the worn linoleum floor. Our modest rented house creaked with every gust of winter wind, but for the first time in a long time, It didn't feel like it might collapse under us. Lila sat at the table, a mason jar of blue paint and an old mailbox propped up in front of her. Her tongue peeked out in concentration as she carefully brushed the bright color over the dents and scratches. A new beginning, painted one stroke at a time. I stirred my coffee absently, the ceramic mug warming my hands more than the drink inside. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was expansive, a kind of space we could grow into instead of shrink inside of. The official paperwork had arrived that morning. The house, the savings, the simple handwritten note attached. For Marjorie, always. I set the documents down on the counter and let the moment stretch. There were no messages from Sherry, no half-hearted apologies from Vernon, no awkward attempts from the others to make amends. Victory, it turned out, tasted a lot like nothing at all. Lila glanced over her shoulder, flashing a small, proud smile. "It's almost done," she said, holding up the now bright mailbox for me to see. I nodded, the corners of my mouth lifting just enough to feel it. She didn't need to know how much that little act meant. I took a slow breath and wandered into the empty living room. The hardwood floors were scuffed and uneven. The walls needed paint. The windows rattled in their frames. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I traced my fingers along the windowsill, remembering how many times I had stood in houses that didn't feel like mine, trying to convince myself I could belong by smiling just a little wider, staying just a little quieter. I didn't have to do that anymore. The phone buzzed on the counter behind me. A message, an unknown number. We should talk. I stared at the blinking screen, my thumb hovering over it for a long moment. Maybe it was Sherry. Maybe it was Vernon. Maybe it was someone else's guilt, finally too heavy to carry alone. I set the phone down without opening it. Some doors, once closed, didn't need reopening. I turned back toward the kitchen, where Lila had begun to stick gold star stickers all over the blue mailbox, giggling under her breath. The future wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished, but it was ours, and that was enough. Sometimes closing a door isn't about anger or revenge. It's about choosing peace over the endless need for validation. Through everything I lived, I learned that freedom isn't handed to you. You claim it, one painful, brave choice at a time. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without letting it break you anymore. Maybe you've stood in rooms like I did, feeling invisible, unheard. If you have, I hope you know now, you are enough. Your worth is not measured by their acceptance. What about you? Have you ever had to walk away from a place or people you once called home? I would love to hear your story. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, or if this story touched your heart, type 1 inch in the comments. If you didn't connect with it, tell me why. I'm always listening. And if you'd like to be part of more journeys like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your story matters here. Thank you for being part of mine.